On our broadcast tonight, the head of the Korea Coast Guard admits his organization's shortcomings in the delayed search efforts and says he will do everything to cooperate with investigations. Prosecutors are now focusing on whether the ferry operator ignored concerns about overloading the vessel. Amid mounting public criticism, the state auditor has launched a preliminary investigation into 4 government ministries and agencies for their possible mismanagement and botched handling of the Sewol-ho ferry accident. Plus, as the possibility of a 4th North Korean nuclear test still lingers, some experts say Pyongyang may continue to have the upper hand until the U.S. midterm elections in November. These stories and more next on ARIRANG News at 8. Thank you for joining us. It's Wednesday, April 30th here in Seoul, and I'm Choi Yu-sun. 2 weeks have passed since the tragic Sewol-ho ferry disaster put the entire nation in a state of shock, sorrow, and frustration. The number of confirmed deaths stands at 212, and 90 people are still unaccounted for. And for a look at the latest developments on the search and rescue efforts and the ongoing investigation, our Kwon So-wa joins us live from the News Center. So, what's the latest?
Hi, Yusan. Just a while ago at a press briefing in Jindo, the Commissioner General of the Korea Coast Guard, Kim Seok-gyun, a member of the government task force handling the ferry disaster, apologized for the pain the Sewol-ho ferry accident has caused for families of the victims. He bowed his head and expressed his deep responsibility for the inefficient and late rescue efforts. He also said he will push for clear answers to the criminal investigations, which include a very shocking revelation that was made today regarding rescue operations in the early days following the ferry sinking. A lawmaker of the Parliamentary Defense Committee said, according to a report by the Defense Ministry, the Maritime Police restricted the Navy from getting close to the accident site and claimed Undin, a private rescue operation company, should dive first. The company was hired by the operator of the sunken ferry, Cheongjin Marine. In the meantime, a special investigation team is speeding up its probe, especially regarding the practical owner of the ferry operator, Yoo Byung-on. Yoo's brother-in-law and 2 daughters have been notified to appear before prosecutors on Friday by 10 a.m. Investigations have revealed that the Sewol-ho ferry had been put up for sale a month before the accident. It was being sold for an amount that would have resulted in financial losses of roughly $5.8 million. Investigators are trying to figure out why.
So another night has fallen on the accident site. How have search operations been proceeding today?
Yusan, 2 more bodies were recovered this afternoon. One was a male student on the 4th floor of the ship, and the other a female student found about 1 kilometer away from the accident site. Earlier this Wednesday, 5 bodies were recovered at around 3 a.m. on the 4th and 5th floors. Despite clear skies today, divers are still encountering problems due to high tides and fast currents. At around 9 this evening, the tides will be at their calmest for the last time this Wednesday, and it's a crucial time window that hopefully brings about results. Now, rescuers are focusing on the 4th floor, where initially most of the missing were thought to be, but also on the 5th floor lobby, where many of the recently retrieved bodies were located.
As the water started coming in, the students probably instinctively rushed to the upper floor.
The students most likely tried to make their way up the stairs to the 5th floor to get onto the deck of the ship, but unfortunately they were not able to get out. Meanwhile, a diving bell to help divers stay underwater for longer periods of time was deployed for around 20 minutes a few hours ago, but had to be pulled up again due to rough water conditions.
So many of the students that survived and were hospitalized after the accident were allowed to go home today. How are they doing?
Yes, out of the 88 patients from the Sewol-ho ferry accident that were hospitalized at Korea University Ansan Hospital, 74 were Danwon High School students and 70 were discharged this Wednesday after lunchtime. Doctors said their conditions had improved considerably.
It's been determined that most of the students don't have any symptoms that could trigger dangerous after effects in the near future.
Many had shown signs of post-traumatic stress following the accident. The president of the hospital said the students should not be exposed to any news on the Sewol-ho or anything else that might remind them of that tragic day. On the request of the students, the group was able to visit the memorial altar in Ansan to say their goodbyes to their fellow classmates and teachers who did not survive. Now, that's all I have for now, but I'll be back with more updates in a further newscast.
2 weeks in, there are still more questions than answers about the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy that left more than 300 people either dead or missing. To get some of the answers, the state auditor has launched an investigation into 4 government agencies to determine what they did and didn't do that may have contributed to the disaster. Our Kim Young-gil has more.
The state auditor has launched a preliminary probe into 4 government agencies that have played key roles in the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. On Tuesday, the Board of Audit and Inspection began looking into the Maritime Ministry, the Ministry of Security and Public Administration, the Korea Coast Guard, and the Korea Maritime and Port Administration. Auditors will be looking into whether the agencies took appropriate measures in dealing with Korea's worst maritime disaster in decades. The preliminary inspection will look into how the agencies managed the safety inspections of ships. It will also review points made by experts and the media about the government response. Although the preliminary probe is supposed to mainly include a review of documents and by the agencies being inspected, the audit board has also dispatched officials to collect additional information. The move is a prelude to an intensive audit planned for next month on the 4 agencies and their handling of the Sewol-ho disaster. To more effectively deal with future crises, President Park Geun-hye announced Tuesday that a new safety ministry will be launched under the purview of the Prime Minister's office. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
There isn't a single person in this country who hasn't been touched by the tragic sinking of the Sewol-ho ferry, and that has translated into an outpour of sympathy for the victims' families. But they had a message for the public on this Wednesday: stop feeling sorry for us. Our Park Ji-won tells us why.
Despite their sorrow, anger, and fatigue, the people representing the families of the Sewol-ho ferry student victims are reaching out to the Korean people who are also grief-stricken by the national tragedy.
Please stop feeling sorry for us. It's us who are unable to protect our own children.
The families have refused to receive direct donations from citizens.
If you have to donate, we have decided we will deposit all the money into a scholarship fund.
However, the families of the victims strongly criticize the government for failing to save student lives because of a faulty rescue system. They said they will hold the government and shipping company accountable for the disaster. The families also called on the government to get to the bottom of the accident to uncover the details about how and why it happened. Lastly, the families asked related agencies and citizens to support the families of those still unaccounted for, who are still desperately waiting their loved ones to return. Park Ji-won, ARIRANG News.
Following North Korea's firing of some 50 artillery shells near the maritime border with South Korea, the U.S. has called on Pyongyang to stop its string of provocations. The next one, however, could come in the form of a nuclear test, but our Kim Hyun-bin tells us some experts believe that a 4th nuclear test isn't imminent.
The press secretary of the Pentagon, John Kirby, called on North Korea on Tuesday to stop its provocations that are stirring up tensions on the Korean peninsula. Kirby's comments came in response to North Korea's live fire drill near the de facto maritime border with South Korea in the West Sea on Tuesday, during which 50 heavy artillery shells were fired. It was the latest in a string of provocative acts from the north of the border. The larger question, though, is what's next? The speculation is that the North will conduct a 4th nuclear test in the near future, but determining when is another story. Despite thorough analysis of several commercial satellite images, Joel Witt, a senior fellow with the U.S.-Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, said it's hard to predict, while Witt said that there are currently no signs that a test is imminent. He added that North Korea is almost certain to carry out a test at some point. Some experts believe that North Korea will conduct its nuclear test during the U.S. midterm elections in November.
At this moment, North Korea's post-nuclear test is not imminent. It's obvious. But the problem is the post-nuclear test may be reserved on holding mode for the time being to select a symbolic timing, considering changing political landscape in the region, including the United States mid-election and the other neighboring countries' political situation.
While we wait, the North Korean regime continues to talk up its nuclear program. The regime on Tuesday condemned U.S. President Barack Obama's visit to Northeast Asia and said it would strengthen its nuclear deterrent. The North's National Defense Commission said it has the capacity to carry out something bigger than a boost-efficient nuclear weapon test or a new intercontinental ballistic missile launch, and that the regime would not dismantle the program under any circumstances. Kim Hyun-bin, ARIRANG News.
The dire human rights situation in North Korea will be in the spotlight at the UN Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday. Finding ways to persuade the North to improve the way it treats its people will be the focus of the Universal Periodic Review. The review studies the human rights situations in all UN member countries every 4 years, and the North is a repeat offender. In a written report submitted to the UN ahead of the review, North Korea said it was making efforts to address its problems through laws to protect the underprivileged. After the review is over, the UN Human Rights Council will adopt a summary along with recommendations for the regime. And shifting gears to some economic news, new output data confirms that most industry sectors here in Korea performed better in March from the previous month. There are also signs that domestic demand is finally beginning to grow. Our Hwang Ji-ae reports on the sigh of relief.
Korea's industrial output last month dismissed worries that the nation's economy might not be recovering as many had hoped. Statistics Korea said Wednesday the output rose across all industries except for the construction sector in March. Production in the mining, manufacturing, and gas industries rose 0.9% last month from February, following 2 straight months of decline. The agency said the gain was led by strong exports of automobiles and semiconductors. More importantly, retail sales and the service industry rebounded, stoking hopes that lackluster domestic demand is finally picking up. Retail sales went up more than 1.5% last month, while service sector production also edged up 0.1%. Further brightening the economic outlook, facilities investment also bounced back, confirming that businesses expect growing demand in coming months. Although the central bank has cautioned that the sunken Sewol-ho ferry disaster might hurt consumer sentiment, Nomura Securities believes the disaster will have a limited impact on the economy. The Japanese brokerage firm said private spending could drop in April but will likely recover soon. It also kept its growth forecast for Asia's 4th largest economy for this year unchanged at 4%. The nation's overall industrial output rose slightly by 0.4% in March after a 1.3% fall in the previous month. Hwang Ji-ae, ARIRANG News.
The world's 2 leading smartphone makers are reaching the end of another court battle. Samsung Electronics and Apple made their closing arguments to a jury in California Tuesday in a patent infringement case worth billions of dollars at stake. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Apple Incorporated and Samsung Electronics have made their final arguments at a $2 billion trial over patent infringement in the U.S. state of California. The two sides were each given 2 hours to make their final cases on Tuesday.
Apple's lawyer Harold McElhinney told the jury that Samsung had become the world's leading seller of smartphones by willfully and intentionally copying the iPhone maker's features. Samsung's lawyer Bill Price said that Samsung's success was based on providing the best hardware for Android, and that the features under fire were already developed and included in Google's independently developed platform. Price said Apple wasn't even using 3 of the 5 patents it raised in the complaint. He said Samsung could not copy something from the iPhone if it wasn't featured in the iPhone at the time. Apple claims some Samsung devices, including the Galaxy S3, infringed on 5 of its patents, including on features like the slide to unlock function and automatic spell corrects. Samsung filed a counterclaim that some of the Apple's devices, including the iPhone 5, infringed upon 2 of its patents concerning Apple's video chatting service called FaceTime and the way in which Apple's devices retrieve and organize digital images. Apple is asking for nearly $2.2 billion in damages from Samsung, who in turn has asked for more than $6.2 million from Apple. Samsung was ordered to pay damages of $929 million to Apple in their first trial over dueling claims of patent infringement. Both companies appealed, and the decision has since moved up to a higher court. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
If you're not already familiar with the Internet of Things, it won't be long until you are. IT research firm Gartner says revenue generated by hardware and service providers in this sector will top $300 billion in 2020. But why look so far ahead? Koreans have already started to integrate the concept into their daily lives, and as our Na Young-kyung reports, there's much more to come.
Connecting physical objects through the internet and creating new information and business models. It's called the Internet of Things. Here's an example. Footage is recorded through numerous surveillance cameras on expressways, and data is collected. But instead of simply having the 2 pieces of information relayed, the internet is used to help connect the 2 and provide authorities better control of the traffic system. And there will be many more examples to list in the future, with the concept evolving into what's called the Internet of Everything.
Some of the key things that are evident today is that there will be massive improvements in terms of efficiency. For example, using energy usage to make the planet more green. Also improvements in agriculture, making of food and so forth, where we keep track of rainfall, appropriate fertilization and so forth, to maximally use our agricultural capacity given climate change and everything else.
For that, internet connectivity and the availability of wireless and cellular networks are critical. And it doesn't hurt that Korea has a state-of-the-art mobile network system. But even with advanced internet connectivity, there are still many more hurdles that not only Korea but the global markets need to overcome before this concept becomes a full part of our daily lives.
The format in which data is sent to networks is not standardized. People will feel the actual effects. Only if related businesses can agree on a standardized protocol for developing technologies and devices.
The Korean government plans to inject $50 million into fostering the Internet of Things market in 2014. Although experts say it will take years, if not generations, for the Internet of Everything to be fully commercialized globally, they also agree that the market for the Internet of Things in Korea is very close to being realized. Na Young-kyung, ARIRANG News.
It's time to check on stories making headlines on the global front, from the deepening crisis in Ukraine to the search for hundreds of kidnapped girls in Nigeria. We go live to our Paul Lee at the News Center. Paul, let's start with Ukraine. Over the past month, we've seen these pro-Russian activists become bolder and bolder. Can you tell us what the current situation is like in Ukraine?
It's a major escalation in the crisis in the eastern part of the country. Hundreds of pro-Russian activists have seized key official buildings in the city of Luhansk, including the government's headquarters and the main prosecutor's office. After sacking the prosecutor's office, the angry mob then attacked the headquarters of the Interior Ministry's police force. Some pro-Russian militants were seen opening fire with automatic weapons, trying to force police officers inside to surrender. The rebel group is demanding that Kiev offer them a Crimea-style referendum to grant them greater autonomy. On Tuesday, UN political chief briefed the Security Council on the latest violence.
Groups of militia and armed civilians are increasing in number and springing up in more cities across the region, seizing buildings, mounting roadblocks, and shutting whole towns and communities off from the rest of the country. There are increasing reports of torture, kidnappings, and violent clashes.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has urged NATO to push back what he called military interference in Ukraine. Kerry said the NATO territory was inviolable and that the alliance would defend every piece of it. Moscow has denied the allegation, saying that it has no aggressive pretensions against its neighbor.
And moving on to the Middle East, Iraqis are heading to the polls for their first election since U.S. forces withdrew Iraq 3 years ago. Paul, can you give us the details of this landmark election?
Voters must choose from among 9,000 candidates, but the ballot is really being seen as a referendum on Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who has governed Iraq for 8 years. However, he's been facing fierce criticism over aggravating sectarian division in the country in an attempt to consolidate power. Increased security forces were deployed on the streets of the capital, Baghdad, as polls opened for the first national election since 2011.
Today is the wedding day for the Iraqi people. We came for change and reform, which the religious authority called for. It is a historic day for the Iraqi people, and we are optimistic.
Iraq is experiencing its worst unrest since 2008, with 160 people killed in this past week alone. Al-Qaeda has threatened to kill any Iraqi who takes part in the election.
And let's now turn our focus to Southeast Asia. It's been, nearly 2 months now since that Malaysia airliner disappeared. Paul, has there been any development on the search for the missing plane?
Well, despite weeks of searching the underwater seabed by an international search team, logging hundreds of hours over the southern Indian Ocean, there is still no confirmed sign of the Malaysian jet. However, Australia-based marine survey company GeoResonance said on Tuesday that it may have found the location of the wreckage of the Boeing 777. The private company said it identified pieces of possible debris in the Bay of Bengal, just south of Bangladesh. Australian officials coordinating the search have downplayed the company's claim and is not consistent with current satellite data. The search agency said that the finding of the plane's black box was their main objective, which could provide answers to why the jetliner went so far off course. Flight 370 went missing on March 8th while flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, carrying 239 people. Investigators believe the plane ended its journey in remote waters off the Australian city of Perth.
Let's shift our focus to Africa. It's been more than a week since hundreds of girls were kidnapped in Nigeria. Paul, any updates on the investigation?
Authorities say 3 rounds of rescue attempts by government forces have failed, and patience is running thin for the affected families. Boko Haram Islamists have been blamed for abducting 190 teenage girls late at night from their school dormitories in northeastern Nigeria. However, community leaders in Borno State claim that more than 240 female students are being held captive by the rebel group. There have been unconfirmed eyewitness reports that the girls have been married off to insurgents, while others say they have been taken out of the country. The unresolved mass abduction has captured the hearts of a nation which has battled through a 5-year insurgency. On Wednesday, activists are planning a million women march through the capital city of Abuja to demand that the government take greater action to win the freedom of the students. Yusun?
All right, Paul, thank you for that update, and we'll see you back here soon. And time to get a check on the weather with our Kim Bo-kyung at the Weather Center. Bo-kyung, what's the latest?
Well, Yusan, it was a nice and sunny day here in Seoul. Weather conditions on Jindo continue to remain calm, but it's the conditions under the sea that are making things difficult. Spring tides will last through this Friday, and until then, tidal currents will speed up to about 2.4 meters per second. Hopefully, we will be able to make some progress over the weekend when tidal currents slow down. Now, shifting our focus to other parts of the country, the nation is under the influence of a low pressure front from the East Sea, which is why we're seeing showers and cloudy skies across. Light-passing sporadic showers will continue to fall in Gyeongsang-Namdo province as well as on Dokdo through later tonight. Otherwise, it may be a foggy morning in the inland region, so please be careful on the roads. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul, Daegu, and Gwangju will make it to 24 degrees while Busan tops out at 20. Moving on to other regions, Jeju starts off the day at 12 degrees with a high of 20, while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang reach 15 and 18 degrees. That's all the updates I have for you at this hour, but I'll be back with more after 10.
Thanks, Po-kyung, and that brings us to the end of our newscast. I'm Choi Yu-sun in Seoul. Join us again for more news updates on our primetime news at 10 p.m. Korea time.